But up next, does just say no work when it comes to teens and sex? Surprising insight into those popular chastity pledges coming up after this.
And we are back now at 7:43 with news that could surprise you when it comes to teenagers and sex. A new study reveals teens who took a pledge of abstinence were just as likely to have premarital sex as those who did not, and even less likely to use protection. Laura Berman is a sex therapist and educator. Laura, good morning to you.
Good morning.
You know, this goes against everything that you would assume to be true. What do you make of the results of this study?
Well, you know, it's disturbing because this is something the government has been spending $200 million on a year. Abstinence-based education, which it typically includes or often includes these virginity pledges. And what we now know, or at least has been proven in a large-scale study that matched teens together, so they were similar on 100 different characteristics except for the fact that they took this virginity pledge versus not taking the virginity pledge. And what they're finding is that these virginity pledges don't delay the age of onset of first sexual encounter. They don't change the number of sexual partners a person is going to have in their lifetime. What it seems to change is the likelihood that they're going to protect themselves from pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases. And the ones who took the virginity pledge were less likely to protect themselves, most likely because they weren't being armed with the information they needed.
So because they didn't understand how to use condoms or anything about birth control, then they didn't have them available to them when they needed them.
Right. It was absolutely, it's that they didn't understand. It's that they had taken the pledge, so they had tuned out when they were presented with this information. And very importantly, not only were they not given the information, comprehensive sex education also includes tools for children, or for adolescents ideally, about how to negotiate for condom use, how to deal with it when your partner doesn't want to use one or says they don't have one, or troubleshooting so that if and when you find yourself in a sexual situation, you know how to handle it, and you know how to protect yourself, and you know how to put your own health first and make those healthy sexual decisions. And this is something that it's exciting because the Obama administration is much more supportive of comprehensive sex education that obviously includes abstinence, but also doesn't put our heads in the sand about the realities of teenagers and feelings of infallibility and immortality that most teenagers have, and the strong sexual impulses that come with that age as well.
You know, one of the things that I found so interesting about this study was that after a year, 50% of the kids who took this pledge denied that they had ever taken it, and after 5 years, that number jumped to 84%. Is that collective amnesia?
That's right. Well, it points to the power of reverse peer pressure, and I think one of the premises of the virginity pledges is that it uses peer pressure to encourage maintaining virginity. But the problem is that because when they've looked at these pledges, kids who really take them, from the heart, not in some huge classroom or group encounter, tend to keep those pledges more, and that it makes sense that if you're in a huge group and everyone else is taking the pledge, you say, oh yeah, I take the pledge too. But then 5 years later, you're saying, what pledge? So it's really, I think first and foremost, parents should be the primary sex educator of their kids, and this is something that you can't leave to the schools, something that you have to impart your own values, have an ongoing conversation with your child about, and make sure that you don't leave out, that you understand that information does not mean permission. And that's the false premise that these abstinence-based educations, are built on.
Laura, there are those who are going to say, though, that there have been other studies in the past that have shown that kids who take this vow of virginity pledge, abstain from sex much longer. So what makes this study more reliable than studies that have come before it?
Well, this was a much more comprehensive study. They used much more complicated statistics than just like a simple regression analysis, which these prior studies have used. And most importantly, the prior studies did not match the teens on other variables. So they would compare pledgers and non-pledgers, but there would be no other similarities in terms of religious background, sexual attitudes, other social variables. In this study, the kids were compared they were similar on 100 different social, emotional variables. The main difference was that they took the pledge versus didn't take the pledge. And so we're really, in this study, looking at a comparison between like teens.
All right, Laura Berman, thank you so much for your insight this morning.
Thank you.
And up